everyone's lives are suddenly much more risky, at the same time have much more opportunity, and basically require us to think about everything completely differently in terms of how we approach risk and how we plan ahead.
I've got a million things I've
And I
written
know
down.
I'm throwing a gazillion things
Oh,
at
that's
you.
fine. I'm just trying to get them ordered in my head in what I want to talk to them about. Let's finish off with the cities part before we go
Yes.
into more. Where does that leave cities? Because look, Real Vision is a company that used to have offices in New York. We had 60 people in New York. We now have 3 people in the office. We can't get out of the lease yet. We're desperate to. You know, we've got people now, everybody's out all over the world. Everybody's the same way. Companies, some of the banks are trying to get people to stay in the office, but it's a losing battle. So the structure of cities changes. Midtown Manhattan is gutted now. Where our offices are, there's all the bodegas have closed down even because people aren't there anymore. And yet Hudson River Valley's flourishing because all the millennials have moved out because they're all now 35 years old. They've got kids. Where are cities going before we move into where all of this is going?
So people have much more choice now, especially the people who can afford to exercise their choice. And in a world of choice, I think a lot of people are going to want to live in cities and in great cities. But even in the best case scenario, that would require a transition of the existing assets to other uses, a transition of other assets like retail. You mentioned bodegas. You still need retail in cities, but maybe you need different types of retail to cater to different types of people at different times of day, based on different assumptions. I kind of like to look at it using the long tail framework from Chris Anderson. So in a world of choice, what ultimately happens is that you get a long tail of more people exercising more choice in all sorts of new locations, Hudson Valley, for example. But also, and that Anderson didn't predict initially, the biggest stars actually become bigger than ever. You get the Taylor Swift and the Avengers franchise, and basically the places that benefit from network effects and everyone always dreamed of participating in. So in a world where all the highest paid employees can live anywhere, many more people are going to want to live in Manhattan if they can, if there's enough housing there for them, and if the city can accommodate them. So I think we'll see some really, really big winners, bigger than ever. We'll see a longer tail of basically anywhere suddenly becoming relevant for high-paid employees to, pitch a tent in or buy a house in. And in between, there'll be a lot of losers, both like middle-sized cities, some of the large cities that are kind of not adapting properly or don't have any redeeming or attractive properties beyond just being a place to work. And either way, even in the best case scenario, it will be a painful process for cities that are often already kind of semi-bankrupt, struggle to provide basic services as it is, and are not famous for moving quickly or kind of, deregulating or unzoning or upzoning things that should be adapted.
Yeah, I mean, I look at when I first went to the US, showing my age in the very early 80s, it was just developing from being the dump that it was from the 60s, unlivable, dangerous, dirty city, because it was the 1930s, it was amazing, and then it went into decline, and and it gets cheap enough where artists can move in, and before you know it, it's Warhol and it's Lou Reed and it's like all of the cool kids are in, and then suddenly culture comes and culture creates more people and everybody wants to move to New York. And it feels like we have to get rid of the little jackets, the sleeveless jackets, and the kind of identikit people who are all there in the city, and bring the culture back that got priced out. Got priced out to Brooklyn, and then Brooklyn got priced out to somewhere else. And so we have to repurpose all the real estate. The shops have to get cheaper in rent to bring the kind of creatives back again, and you can rebuild a city from that. That's my mental model, but that takes time, and most of this commercial real estate is going to get defaulted on.
Yeah, and there's a difference between the 30s and what came next. And now, again, they were heading for that linear industrial economy, which produces a broad middle class. We're in a world that doesn't necessarily produce that, definitely not of its own device, without some serious policy changes. So if you look at Manhattan today, the shape of the city already reflects a bimodal distribution of sorts. You have these super, super tall buildings where you need $50 million to even buy the most basic apartment, or you have these tall public housing projects, but you don't have a lot of in between, definitely not things that are being built today. And in such a city, it'll be hard to reproduce the fun of, previous eras. At the same time, assuming that we're moving into a society that introduces all sorts of new social services, that tries to give people the best education, the best healthcare, the best living environment, cities have a huge role to play in that world, because they're the only places that are dense enough to allow you to provide those type of services efficiently and economically, and to keep your society, healthy, and ensure that enough people get an opportunity and that they can really show up somewhere and have access to things that might lead them up one day. So cities have, in a way, a more important role than ever to play in such a polarized society from an income perspective. But so far, they have a long way to go in order to become whatever they need to become in order to fulfill that role
Yeah,
in
I
the
think
21st century.
they play an important role. The more digital society gets, the more into the metaverse that we go, the more humans will need a physical community as well. In a way that we've kind of lost. Most people are kind of drifting now. We don't have physical community anymore. We kind of lost it. Everyone left home from their parents. We don't have that Mediterranean culture, or the culture my father would have grown up with in India. That's all gone. You
Mhm.
know, so we just don't have that nuclear family. We don't have the village. We don't have in England the village pub and the culture around that's all gone.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like in an increasingly digital world, we'll probably come back to that. But I do worry about what the hell happens to the middle America cities. I just drive through some of these cities. I'm like, they're full of insurance companies and, whatever, medical manufacturing businesses. I'm like, there is just no future for any of this stuff. These people don't need to work here. And most of these jobs aren't going to exist 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the issue with those cities is that they're not cities to begin
And they're
with.
not
I
livable
mean,
either because
yeah, they're not livable, they're not walkable, they're not pleasant. Unless you have to work there, you don't want to be there. So I think those that are pleasant or have something unique about them, and something unique could be a different value. Like for some people, something unique could mean a lot of parking. That's a value proposition for some people. So cities that kind of have something clear that they stand for, or lower taxes, or different weather, or more conservative or Christian value, whatever it is, if they stand for something clear, just like any other kind of niche product on the internet, they have a chance in a world of abundant choice. If not, if they just assume I have a captive audience because these 5 companies are here, then things might change, and they might change really, really quickly, just like we saw during COVID. It's not companies transitioning over 30 years. It's just like one morning everyone says, oh, actually the employees don't have to be here anymore. Don't show up. Thanks. It's been nice. And that actually happened in many places already, but many of them are in denial about things kind of coming back, and let's try to force the employees to come back, and let's negotiate with the CEO and give it another year. But it's been 4 years, and I think I call it the 5 stages of real estate grief. It's like it's time to let go. So
yeah. And eventually, I think these regional banks will have to go begging to the Federal Reserve
yeah,
and say, look, sorry, we've got all this stuff. It was the pandemic, not our problem. The Federal Reserve say, yes, don't worry, give it to us.
right.
And
It's a systemic risk, maybe not terminal in itself, but in together with all sorts of other things that are happening.
yeah,
It's a risk for banks as well.
yeah,
I think though COVID is not going to be. I mean, COVID was that kind of excuse for retail. Retail landlords held up for a decade, and then when COVID happened, a lot of them let go and just said, "Oh, it's COVID. I'm throwing in the towel."